Hello there, I'm Presley, and today I will be going over the events and giving my overall thoughts on the 14th episode of the Bleach TYBW Blood War. Now, episode 14 is the first episode of the second core of the TYBW Blood War. The episode is titled The Last 9 Days, which is the same as chapter 546. Now, we open up on a new scene to the anime. And it's an interesting scene to see because it seems to be a scene showing the birth of Yuhabak, or Yuhabaha, depending on which one you want to call him. Now in this scene we see what most people would assume would be a recounting of his birth, which is very fascinating because this scene, like I mentioned, it's new to the anime. It does not exist in the manga. I mean, there is a scene in the manga later on showing a baby Yuhabak, but, it's not like this. It is very fascinating to see this scene because you have him being formed, and then you have this woman made out of blue energy holding the newborn Yuhabak. And then we see people holding the newborn baby up and chanting his name over and over again. And we see him start to absorb the energy from the people holding him up. And we see this shadowy baby start to grow. We see it grow into a young child, to then someone in their late teens or maybe early 20s, which looks a lot like Tensa's Zangetsu. And then finally we see it end on a shot of current day Yuhabak. Then of course the new opening theme plays, which is Stars by WOD. And now I thought this opening was fantastic. I loved the visuals. They very much reminded me a lot of the earlier Bleach openings, with just the way that it had all the characters in these very, stylish and fashionable clothing, going around doing their own thing. But, also while having a hint of foreshadowing and spoilers sprinkled in, but in a way to where if you haven't read the manga and don't know what's going to happen, I don't think you'd pick up on them. Now, of course, we get another new anime-only scene of Ichibei talking to Ichigo. And, he brings up the fact that the Soul Society has gotten weaker in the past 1,000 years. Of course, Ichigo is very insistent that he needs to head back to the Soul Society, to, help them prepare to fight Yuhabak and, the Stern Winners. But of course, Ichibei tells him that, he can't, because even if he does go back, he'd still be beaten by Yuhabak, because in his current state, he has no hope of beating him. Then, of course, we head over to a scene of the Stern Winners meeting. Then, of course, you have Yuhabak come out to address his army, of course, and he brings Uryu out. And, this confuses the Stern Winners as to why this random guy is there. Then, of course, Yuhabak announces that he intends to make Uryu his successor. Some of the scenes in this episode were rearranged a bit, which overall I think does help the overall flow of the episode. Mainly, the Bambietta scene now happens right after the meeting instead of a bit later. Of course, she goes up to this guy, and, she asks him to meet her in her room. Of course, he's like, of course I will. Of course, then we cut over, and he is being split in half, an unfortunate end. But, it happens. And, we see Bambietta zipping up her top. Then we cut over to Basby. He's making a scene, He punches the wall. He is furious over the fact that Uryu is being appointed as the successor to Yuhabak. However, this time, unlike in the manga where it's only a few Stern Winners we see in the scene, we also see the Bambis there as well. We get to hear them talking amongst themselves a bit, This time, instead of Basby leaving the room and then being confronted by Yugrum actually comes into the room. Basby is arguing a bit with Yugwam over this news, and Basby mentions that pretty much all the Sternwitters would have been okay with with someone being the successor to Yuhabak if it was Yugwam specifically. Of course, Askin Naklavar steps in, to kind of keep things from escalating here. We then, of course, see Yuhabak bleeding into something for Uryu to drink from to then properly gain his Schrift, which will, of course, be the same letter as Yuhabak, A. But before he drinks the blood, Uryu asks him why he picked him as his successor. And this is interesting because in the manga, he doesn't ask him this until after he's already drank the blood, so I kind of like this rearranging of the scene a bit better, to be honest. And of course, during this, we get this new anime-only scene while Uryu is talking, which is honestly, it is a gorgeously done scene of Uryu standing in a graveyard, standing at what is presumably his mother's grave, and you see all these other graves, which you could assume are the other Quincy's that were killed during the incident 9 years ago. Of course, Uryu then drinks the blood, giving him his powers is now done now that he's drank the blood. It'll take a while for them to, appear though, obviously. Then, of course, we switch over really quickly to Waco Mundo, where we see Chad and Orihime talking for a bit, and we also see someone walking with them. We cut back over to where Urahara is, and we see him working in his tent. Then we cut over to a new Ichigo training scene, with Ichigo being led into a place that he's going to be allowed to train in. We then, of course, cut over to Nanao and Sunsui talking, and of course Sunsui raises some concerns over the concept of Ichibei training Ichigo. We then get the comedic scene of Shinji and Hiyori screaming and yelling at each other over the phone, with Shinji being like, please, I'm begging you, you must help us. And Hiyori, of course, responding, it doesn't sound like you're begging me. And this goes back and forth a bit until Hachi arrives with a gift sent from Shinji and Mayuri. They basically want Hiyori to help them fix some of the disruptions that were caused, that have happened between the world of living and the Soul Society as a result of what's been going on. We then cut over to Renji and Rukia training a bit with each other. We get them talking a bit back and forth. Then Rukia is called by Tenjiro, who informs her that Byakuya's finally, he's awake and he's moving around. Then we cut over to the world of the living, where we see Ichigo's friends. Of course, while they're talking, Sunsui appears. Of course, Sunsui mentions that he came there to talk to them about them potentially having to part ways with Ichigo. And, they're all surprised by this. He mentions that Ichigo is currently training in a place where very few people are permitted to enter, and he isn't sure what type of powers Ichigo is going to come back with. And he mentions that depending on what they could be, Ichigo may not be allowed to attend the world of living. If his powers turn out to be something that would disrupt the world of living. Keigo walks up and he grabs a hold of Sunsui. He's yelling. He's very clearly upset. But yes, after Keigo voices his frustration with this, Sunsui mentions that this is potentially a 1 in 10,000 chance that this will even happen, because there's no way of knowing what's going to happen with Ichigo. Regardless of that fact, he does give Ichigo's friends soul tickets that will allow them to travel to the Soul Society, just in case the worst case scenario of Ichigo does happen. That way they'll be able to properly say goodbye to him. We then cut back over to Chad and Orihime, with Chad and Orihime exchanging words for a bit. Then we cut back over to the Soul Society. We see a pinwheel turning, and then it stops. Then, of course, we see the Soul Society start to be covered in shadows. And of course, the Soul Society is basically transported into the area where the Quincy's have been residing these past 1,000 years and where they've been hiding out. Of course, then we cut over to Yuhabak, Ugrum, and Uryu. And then, of course, Yuhabak asks Uryu if he knows how this specific song goes. And Uryu mentions, yeah, the confined Quincy King regains his pulse after 900 years, his mind after 90 years, and his strength after 9 years. Of course, Yuhabak then adds that there is another line to that most people don't know, which is, of course, the line of, "and the world in 9 days." And that's where the episode ends. Then the ending theme plays, which I also thought was very good. The ending is End Roll by Yo Kamiyama. I hope I said that name right. Now, let's move on to my overall thoughts. I think that so far, the overall pacing has been really good for this episode. I really like the pacing. Of course, the ending poem for this episode is another new poem. Of course, the poem is from Wankiku. It's always great to see these poems. I always love them. They're such a nice little addition. Now, what I was saying about the Yuhabak scene in the beginning is it leaves me with a lot of questions, obviously, as I'm sure it has all of us. What is up with the woman? What is going on with the blue woman holding an infant Yuhabak? I need to know. I need to know what that's meant to be. Is it symbolic? Is it meant to be taken literally? What is going on with that scene? I don't know. I have many questions because of it. Quite a few questions, in fact. Because on one hand, if it's a symbolic sort of thing, and it's like, oh, it's just like, it's meant to symbolize a woman holding him, in a motherly fashion. And if it's meant to be taken literally, then I think that's interesting because for me and a lot of other people, we immediately associate the blue reishi with the Quincy's specifically. So this is very interesting, a lot to think of, honestly. That being said, overall, I really liked this episode. I thought it was a great premiere episode for the second core. I greatly enjoyed it. Well, I think I'm going to end the review here. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week. I'll see you in the next video.